How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion. So we got P Diddy in the news, facing some charges, including sex trafficking. That's a big one, racketeering. So they're federal charges. And we figure if things don't go so well for him, he's going to find himself in federal prison. Right now, he's actually at the Manhattan jail. And I actually read something recently that they believe that there could be threats to his life, and we'll get to that. But I thought what we could do today is discuss what life will be like for P. Diddy if he is sentenced and finally heads his way to federal prison. Now, granted, guys, federal prison, they do deal with a lot of high-profile cases, so this is nothing that's this isn't strange to them. This is what they usually deal with. But with that said, I thought it would be good to kind of let you know a little bit more about how we deal with those more famous inmates. What are our concerns? How does media attention affect the facility? I mean, even at the state level, we have inmates that do have a lot of notoriety, that are the famous because they're famous coming in, or they're famous because of the crime they committed. So I think this will be a great discussion. I think there are some unique concerns that we could talk about when it comes to P. Diddy's case. So I think this will be good. And guys, I just want to mention two books I do have on the market that are doing well, but I just want to bring them back up. Guys, I have a bunch of books on the market. You could check out Blue 360 Media and look up Anthony Gangi. But in the meantime, you got to get your hands on these two books, Inmate Manipulation Decoded or Breaking Boundaries. But both these books deal with manipulation. This more so of the game about manipulation, the tactics, but this is more about undue familiarity. And these books are doing well, but these books are career-saving books. And both of these books are available on Amazon. And if you're in training, these are good books that could be a very strong foundation for training that you can give your staff. And this is evergreen stuff here. This is stuff that you could even utilize years down the line. So again, today's show is going to be managing celebrity inmates like P. Diddy. And we are going to focus obviously on P. Diddy, but basically how you manage one celebrity, it's really not going to be much different. But let me get Joe. What's up, Joe?
What's happening, brother?
Hey, guys, by the way, real quick, if you guys get a chance, Russ Hamilton has a fundraiser. Right now, Russ Hamilton had damage to his home. He's in the process of getting back, but there's some issues with the insurance company. So he's kind of going from place to place until his home is fully done, which looks like it's getting to that point. But if you guys are interested, please check out the GoFundMe Russ Hamilton page if you want to give a little something towards him. I forgot about that, Joe. I didn't want to forget that. Hey, Joe, it's good to have you back, man. You mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years. Currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
Yes, and we love having you. Hey guys, real quick, I did read an article from Daily Mail, so you kind of take that as you will, but they talked about that P. Diddy's life could be in jeopardy once he goes into jail. I just want to say something just in the context of this dialogue. You always have to assume, especially a case like this or the crimes that he did, because there's sex trafficking, probably some underage minors in there, that the life could be in jeopardy. It's kind of like a safe assumption. So, I mean, I know the news kind of writes it as breaking news. It's something I think as jail management, you have to be kind of aware of, that this could be a possibility. I just want to get that out there. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, definitely. And that goes with any high profile case, not just P. Diddy's, but I mean, there's a lot of high profile cases out there that we need to be aware of and be cognizant of.
Yeah, especially if it's related to kiddie offenses, or just, someone that wants to connect to that P. Diddy spotlight, share that fame by taking him out. I mean, it's that type of world. And that kind of brings us to the first part. I broke this section down. I broke this dialogue down to 7 parts. The first part is challenges of managing a celebrity inmate. And I have, one is the influence of fame. So, Joe, I put down that I thought we could discuss real quickly how P. Diddy's celebrity status could significantly impact the prison environment. So basically his iconic role in music culture might lead to admiration from some inmates, while others could resent him for wealth and status, or just connect to that spotlight. And however way they seem would be the best way to connect, whether it's becoming his friend or taking him out. And this mix of admiration or animosity can create unique social tension within the inmate population that requires careful management. Hey, Joe, I want to talk about the first thing, the admiration. So, guys, just to let you know, when P. Diddy goes into prison, or probably when he's in the jail, it's probably going to be pretty much the same way of managing him. He's going to have to be isolated from the general population. 100%. I mean, and we'll get into constant watch in a little bit because obviously his mental health could be a concern, but we'll get to that. But when it comes to managing the inmate, he's going to have to be isolated because there's two main concerns. And I'll ask Joe definitely his opinion on this. One is, could there be a threat to his life for whatever reason? I mean, now he's got these crazy crimes that are being exposed. So do we have people in the prison that know people that could have been affected? Or do I want to be that hero and connect to that light and take out this person and be forever famous because I'm the one that took out P Diddy? But the other thing also is he's coming in with a lot of status that people could admire, and he could create some crazy influence that could be adverse to what we need to run an effective operation. So there's a lot of ways you could look at this. One could be the threat on him or the influence that he has going in, either way. But what's your thoughts on managing him at the very beginning, Joe, and really keeping him isolated from the general population so we can figure out where we're at with him?
In cases like this, it's really hard because you got a well-known celebrity who's being accused of, all these crimes that he's being accused of, and in the back of your mind, you got to consider multiple things. You got to consider his celebrity status, whether or not he may or may not be gang affiliated, on or off the radar. You got to think about, if you're going to put him in general population, is he going to be more of a distraction to general population? Is it going to cause concerns where, his celebrity status and admiration, the inmates that, admire him, is it going to cause more of a disturbance because of the admiration where it, interrupts, it interrupts the security practices and interrupts, daily routines, whatever. And then you got to look at the opposite side of it too, because of what he's being charged with. You still got inmates out there that live by the old convict code that, may have a hatred for him because of what he's done. So, there's a lot of factors that come into play when somebody like that comes to your facility. I just heard not too long ago on the news that his bond appeal hearing was denied. So, he did not get a bond, which means he'll remain until, his trial starts. But there's quite a few things that you have to take into consideration right off the bat. Is this guy going to be such a disruption to the facility, not because he's being disruptive, but because of his celebrity status would cause a disruption, to the facility and population that you got to keep them isolated. You really got to have your ear to the ground as far as what's going on and knowing your facility, the culture and what kind of inmates you already have there. I know they try to, when they try to take these guys to facilities, they try to take them to facilities, where they're housed with people of the same status or, celebrity status. You got your high profiles, but, we all know that at some point he's going to hit population. So, it's a tough gig for whoever the warden or the administrator is of that facility because you got to really have good intel on a facility as to, having people listen to the inmates are already there prior to him getting there to find out what the culture might be like. That whoever the administrator is for that facility where he's going to be housed has got some tough decisions to make. And, unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer at this point because we really don't know. He's just accused at this point. He's not convicted. So, there's multiple things you got to take into consideration.
Yeah, and guys, and be advised, the feds usually land about 90% of their cases, so we may be able to assume that he could enter the prison. We don't know, but I would lean maybe towards that. But in a jail, they may not be there long term, so they can handle isolation because it's not going to be long term. Be there until the trials goes through, if he goes to trial, or until he pleads, whatever it is, until the guilt finding is there or innocent. But if he is found guilty and he goes to federal prison, now he's there long term. So you're talking about this is where he's going to be. So I agree with Joe. It's not ideal to keep this person in isolation long term. So eventually what's going to wind up happening is you're going to have to try to do your best to introduce them to some GP setting, even if it's a GP among the PC, because you could have levels of PC that are congregate PC. But either way, when it comes to that long-term setting, maybe you can put him in a congregate PC setting. So he would start off as non-congregate, get him into the system a little bit, but you always should be gearing towards congregate PC, and then maybe just leave him there. Let's leave him there and just make sure you protect that PC process. But I agree, Joe. I mean, the long term of keeping someone by himself, maybe the jail could justify, but once that person gets to the prison, you're talking about a guy that could be there for years. You got to start trying to get those interactions. And so usually you can really get those interactions in a congregate protective PC, protective custody setting. One of the other things we talked about managing, we kind of discussed it briefly, was I put the psychological impact. So explore how the transition from celebrity life to incarceration could psychologically affect someone like P Diddy, and the loss of freedom, privacy, and autonomy may lead to challenge in adapting to prison life, particularly for a high-profile individual used to controlling his environment. Discuss the importance of mental health monitoring support. I want to mention something, guys. When people are in jail, I still think they're going to go through the same precaution of isolation, as we mentioned, and then also the constant watch, a lot of stuff, because you have a guy that lived a good life that now is everything's attacking him right now, and outside of his freedom as well as the brand. It's busy. I mean, his world is going to fall apart. So there's many reasons. Even if the inmate comes up and says, "I'm not going to hurt myself, I'm fine," there's too many circumstances right now for me to even believe that. So you're going to wind up having to put the person on constant watch, because automatically, I mean, this is a serious fall from grace. Let's just say that. You got a guy that's living the life, and then all of a sudden he's going to go now into the prison setting. But I want to say a little something about jail and prison that may be a bit different. Sometimes when it's jail, I mean, you got people that kill themselves in jail, so nothing's 100%, but hear me out, just in a bit of a comparison, and nothing's 100%, but just to kind of add this perspective. In jail, they're still battling for their case. Maybe there's some hope. They're protecting their name. So they may want to ride this out. They may. It depends on how bad the evidence is. It depends on what the lawyer is selling them, because sometimes the lawyer gives them this bit of hope. But eventually when they come to the prison, even though they have the appeals, to some extent, the lawyer could still sell that bridge of hope. But I think reality starts to kick in, because granted, these appeals may last for years. And even if the person is fully acquitted years down the line, because it took so long, people are still going to believe that person did it. Yeah. And it's funny how things shift, because when you've done something wrong, and maybe you could watch this as the case evolves, you don't question the evidence, you question the due process, you question the integrity of the investigators, you question things that are still up for grabs, which moves people away from what you actually did and looks at the integrity of the people that are overseeing whatever the investigation is, the collection of evidence, the overall picture. So when he goes into the prison setting, the biggest concern is going to be is, one, now it's reality. Maybe the hope is somewhat lessened. And that's why when he comes in, we're immediately going to put that person on constant watch for quite some time. I constant watch, close watch. They're definitely going to be under some close observation. And even years later, if there's an appeal, and this is how the system always got to keep in touch with everything. When we get word that if he goes through an appeal and if he loses the appeal, he's going to go back on a constant watch again. Because, again, even though he may have settled in, hope is gone. Because at that point, so from the jail, you got the hope. But then when you go from jail to prison, the hope lessens. And then eventually when you go for that last appeal, the hope is ultimately gone. And again, it's tough when you got to manage hopeless inmates. So, I mean, usually when you feel that there's no hope, you got to kind of put them on that watch to make sure that they don't do anything foolish. But, Joe, does that make a lot of sense, this constant watch from hope to hopeless?
It does. It does. Not only just for that reason, but, you got to look at the aspect, too, that this is a fresh investigation. It's still being investigated, even though they have made the arrest. And there are times where inmates come in and they're placed on what they call an investigative hold, where they can't have any contact by phone, by tablet, or anything with anybody other than their attorney, because of the fact that, the investigator put a hold on them. So he's not allowed to have any, he may not be allowed to have any contact with anybody outside of the realm of his attorney. So that kind of adds to the concerns of worry of isolation, and, because you already got somebody who's incarcerated, may be in a cell by himself, and then there's a possibility he may not be allowed to contact anybody other than his attorney, because the investigation is still ongoing, and they don't want the integrity of the investigation room, because he's trying to put phone calls out there to try, rally support or try to get people to change stories or whatever. So, that's something you got to keep in mind too, when you get somebody of that status at your facility. And like you said, we're talking about a well-known individual with high celebrity status that has, and I hate to say taking a fall from grace, because he hasn't been convicted yet. But nevertheless, his lifestyle has drastically changed in an immediate manner. He come from, having money to do whatever he wants to. He still has money, but he can't do what he wants because, he's in custody. So that's a pretty harsh change to adapt to overnight. And from what I understand, hell, he moved to New York knowing that the investigation was going and that there was a possibility of an arrest. So it kind of sounds like to me he was kind of prepared for it to happen. But nevertheless, even though you're prepared for it mentally, when it happens to you physically, it's still going to mess with you emotionally. And that's something that still needs to be looked at and considered. I don't want to call it suicide watch. I'd say maybe emotional breakdown watch, because at some point the walls are going to close in on him. It's going to be on his mind. And, the facilitators, the administrators of that facility need to keep that in mind, and we don't know how long it's going to take for this to go to trial. They said on the news, it could be a year, it could be 2 years. So, a lot can happen in that time span. But the initial setting of him coming in, it really doesn't change the precautions no more than somebody off the street that doesn't have celebrity status, who's accused of the same crimes. Because, no matter which way it goes, they're looking at big time in prison if they get convicted of it. So, just because he's a celebrity, the process itself doesn't change. Because of his celebrity status, there may be some additional steps we have to look at some point, maybe not in the immediate future, but, maybe, 30, 60 days down the line, as things start to progress a little bit.
Yeah, and I gotta say, the reason why I've been leaning towards guilty is there's going to be other charges that are going to come his way. Right now, they're focusing on the three, the sex trafficking, whatever, the interstate sex trafficking, the racketeering. But I saw the video with Casey Ventura, the singer that he was trying to represent, and how he beat her up in the hotel. I mean, that alone, to me, is worth prison time. So hopefully, if anything, Casey Ventura gets justice for what he did. I mean, again, we'll figure out the other charges, but that's something you see right there. That's right on video. So, and then he comes in and apologizes for it. But yeah, you apologize after it made it out, and it's still no excuse. Any one of us did that in the real world. You can say the apologies all you want. All that tells me is that you admitted you're doing it. That's all I need. I apologize. Thank you very much. And we'll take that into account. But when you apologize, that means you're admitting probably to some extent that you did it, or some extent have responsibility over it. Because it's funny how you can apologize and be, well, that, I don't know what that was. Something came over, and that's a bullshit apology. Yeah. Apology should equate to some level of responsibility, not a chance to apologize and shift blame.
You're only sorry when you get caught.
Yeah, I agree. So the next part we kind of touched on, but we'll may have to revisit a little bit. But I talked about security and housing decisions for high-profile inmates. So again, we kind of touched on it. I mean, a lot of these things bleed into together, but maybe there's a chance we can add a little more. But we said protective custody versus general population. So this part, Joe, it's more about analyzing whether P Diddy would be housed in protective custody. And guys, I'm taking questions that were sent to me. That's why you see me reading it. Or general, or whatever. All right, sorry. Analyze whether P Diddy would be housed in protective custody, PC, or general population. Given his fame, there could be a high risk of extortion, assault, or manipulation. Makes sense. Making PC a likely option. Or however, isolation can negatively affect his mental health. Discuss the pros and cons of each approach and how correctional officers balance safety and the need for human interaction. Can I mention something? We say isolation. I get it. But when we put people in units that on the surface could look like they're being isolated, trust and believe mental health is seeing them every day. Programs are being provided every day. I mean, you don't got someone in the dark. They're going to be interacting with staff every day. I mean, the reason why they may not be interacting with inmates is because we haven't determined it's safe to do so. But there usually is always going to be an effort to introduce them to that congregate PC setting. Now, to be honest with you, and I guess, whoever runs the federal prisons probably know better, but I think for someone of this type of fame, especially if you move away from the mental health component of isolation, but really look towards his safety, I think he's someone that should be in some type of, again, so if you want to balance it, congregate PC, so he can have the interaction. It helps him his mental health, but it limits the interaction because he is someone that he could have status, could have great influence, or he's someone that could be a target for extortion or just a target to get at. So I think the middle ground of this is if you want to balance the mental health component, the fear of isolation with kind of getting them into GP something, the component would be safely controlled congregate protective custody. Eventually, not right away, but eventually. What's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, and again, like I said earlier, there's a lot of factors that play into this because depending on where they're at in the investigation, depending on what the judge ordered when he was taken into custody and all that stuff, is he allowed to be in a general population setting? Is he allowed to have any contact with anybody other than his attorney? Again, he may be under a federal gag order to where he can't talk to anybody but his attorney. He can't have any contact with anybody outside the penitentiary for a little while because he may be on an investigative hold. So there are things that need to be considered, other than the mental health aspect. Do I see him being in isolation for a long period? I don't. I honestly don't. I haven't seen anybody else, rap stars and high profile celebrities that were placed in PC just because of their celebrity status. I think at some point he'll probably be placed in a congregate PC setting where they may be a wing for protective custody, but they still act as a general population. They go to the day room together. They're fed meals together, all that kind of thing. I don't foresee him being in any kind of isolated status for a long period of time. It's not like he's a hardcore rapper. He's not, to my knowledge, he's not a gangbanger. It's not like that, he's not that hardened individual that most of your celebrities portray themselves to be. So I really honestly think that he'll probably be in some sort of general population setting. But again, it's really one of those things where the administrators are going to need to know the culture of their facility. Listen to the buzz on the streets. Staff that are kind of tuned into the offender population and listen to what's being said, because sometimes words speak volumes, and kind of understand the culture and the temperature of your facility before you make any kind of decisions as far as population status. But I don't my personal take on this is I think he'll probably be isolated for a little while because I think there was some question as to his prior to his arrest, him reaching out to people.
Coercion.
For coercion, trying to get them to retract stories. And, again, that's just what's being accused. Don't know that, it's actually what was done. So like I said, he may be in an isolated status where he can't have any communication with anybody other than his attorney. And I think at some point, if that is actually the case, it'll probably be lifted as time progresses and, the investigation continues. I don't really foresee him being in an isolated status very long just because of who he is and what he's done. It's not like he's the only celebrity that been in that status. So, I mean, if we isolated everybody due to celebrity status or due to crimes, we wouldn't have a general population.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like, when Joe mentioned, like, gang member or hardcore member, we're comparing that to what we oversee inside the facility. So trust me, from what I could think of, but you never know, he doesn't look like or he'll be called out pretty quick if you try to be that person. But my biggest concern, like what Joe said, also my biggest concern is safety. Yes, 100%. But my biggest concern is the influence.
Yeah.
Will he have influence? And I know, Joe, this is tough for you to discuss because you're a big P Diddy fan, have been your whole life. Joking, guys. I mean, the music was okay, but once you do this, man, kind of following the steps to me of an R. Kelly. So, Joe, I think this next part of this question would be pretty interesting for you because you've actually kind of worked in different departments, including the investigative division. So when you get a high-profile inmate coming in, I know there's work on the back end from the investigative division because each step is done after it's been reviewed, and we try to determine that there is nothing active, and then we feel safe to release the person. And it's funny because even if the person wants to go to, let's say, a congregate PC, because I actually see that could be the furthest he'll go. But federal prisons, they can handle high-profile a little bit, different than state does. I mean, I know if it was state, they're stopping at a guy like this would be the most congregate PC, congregate protective custody. But remember, feds deal with a lot of high profile cases, a lot of famous individuals. So maybe they could be housed a little bit differently. But for us, I think that would be the highest level. But it's not that, the person comes out and says, I'm ready, let's do it. It's really not up to the person. We do get their input, because that does help us, God forbid, for liability. But what it doesn't help us with is if the guy tells us he's okay and we know of things that means he wouldn't be okay. Because at some extent, we're also supposed to make them aware of it to some extent. Not so much crazy where you're giving them total specifics, but when you're interviewing, you may want to know, hey, so do you have any enemies in these areas? Because, there's been some phone calls made and, these are some of the concerns we have if we put you in. So you want to make sure that when they say yes, and they want to go and you take it into consideration, it's okay if their yes is kind of an informed yes. Again, you got to protect what's confidential. I didn't say break confidentiality, but the guy's got to know the depth of his yes. It's not just a yes that I'm good, let's go. Hold on. Let me just tell you some of the concerns we think you may deal with. And then you tell me if you're still okay, and then we'll still look ahead and see how active these concerns could be. But Joe, this is what I got. Someone said, detail how facilities conduct threat assessments for high-profile inmates like P. Diddy. This would include evaluating the risks from other inmates, potential gang attention, or even threats from outside the facility. Highlight how past high-profile cases have been handled and the importance of proactive measures to prevent incidents. Checking phones, checking mail. I mean, Joe, you got this guy coming into your facility, and we're getting ready to say, okay, well, this is coming in prison or jail. Let's say the prison side. And obviously there's always going to be effort to try to introduce that person to some level of GP setting. What are we looking for? What kind of research are you doing? How do we determine when it's good to go or when, I'm sorry, even though he wants to go, it's not going to happen, not at this time.
While this guy's in an isolated status, this is where the investigative division is crucial. We're monitoring phone calls. There's systems out there where you can put in keywords that flag on the phone log. So, say we put the words P Diddy in the phone system as flagged terms, any phone call that references that, are flagged and we review them. We're listening to phone calls. We're monitoring mail. We're trying to get a handle on the temperature of the facility to find out, if this guy's going to have a problem. Us housing him where he's going to be housed, it's not really his choice. We're not going to give him the option of going to PC and him saying, I'm okay, I don't care what's being said. No, it doesn't work that way, because once you're in our custody, we still have to look at the safety aspect. We got to make sure that he's physically okay and taken care of and protected. So, there's the phone system that can be monitored. If he's coming to a facility, you can have your mailroom staff start monitoring mail a little bit closer, anything, mostly everybody's going to the scan letters and stuff. And you can still enter keywords in that too, because they can be recognized through scans. So, we're going to be looking at that, as an investigator, we're going to have our staff with the ear to the ground, kind of ear hustling, listening to what's being said. during mass movements, during chows, during recreations, during, just so we can get a well-rounded opinion as to whether or not this guy's going to be okay. Like in Texas at one point in time, way back in the early 90s, we actually had select facilities that were for high profile examples, ex-police officers, ex-judges, ex-lawyers, ex-politicians, ex-celebrities. When they look at him for a classification, I'm sure they're going to try to put him at a facility of the same. But, again, because of his celebrity status and his fame, that's something that's going to have to be taken into consideration. But, for boots on ground, the investigative division is going to be doing a lot of monitoring to find out, they're probably going to be working pretty close with gang intelligence to find out, if there's been any kind of communication or any kind of, outspoken members that mentioned, admiration or hatred. There's a lot of things that are involved in this in order to make an actual good assessment.
Yeah, and guys, I think ultimately, I like what Joe said. It's our determination. We'll make sure. I mean, it's great when we have an inmate that's willing to go. To let's say that GP non-Congress, and that's great. That helps us out because now, once you get them willing to go, you don't have them pulling out the bullshit generalized safety concerns. Where if you release me, because sometimes. If there is no reason to keep them, you don't want to keep them isolated either. So sometimes they'd rather be by themselves. So they'll say, well, people are coming to get me who? All the Bloods, they just go very crazy, very general, no specifics. And then it's determined that, there really is no threat. But now it becomes a bit difficult because the person still wants to be there. So now you got to be worried that the person is going to keep on making the complaints. And if something does happen, those generalized complaints can be used against you. But it's still not a good idea to always keep the person there either. So we usually, it's like you got to be specific. If you were threatened, when, where, who, what day, because we need to look into it to see if the threat is credible. But so, well, everybody threatens me every day. You got to be more specific. What are they saying? Who said it? Because again, you got to know these things, and you got to make that determination of, okay, so it's good to let the person out. So it's good to have the person, the yes works from the individual, but that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be in agreement with what the facility is going to want. All right. So the next part I got, Joe, is supervision and daily management of a celebrity. So this is staff interaction. And by the way, going back to the PC for one more second, Joe, something you mentioned, staff, the frontline officers, the supervisors of that area, they also should be, and I believe they are, very involved in what happens to that inmate next. I mean, do you want to keep them in the isolation of PC non-congregate, or do you want to introduce them some congregate level of PC, because the staff there have to manage it? So they need to be involved in that input because they can tell you, yeah, this is something we believe we can manage. I mean, sometimes staff will even tell you, like, remember you get the guy that gives the bullshit generalized complaints, staff will tell you that's not happening. We watch his interactions every day. There's nobody coming to the cell. You got no letters, I'm sure, coming in. There's no phone calls as you guys check. So staff's input is very much welcome, or should be very much welcome, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to tell you that, we can do this. Just, basically you need their input. So for staff interactions, so this comes with supervision and daily management of a celebrity. So let me put that back in again. Staff interaction, discuss the importance of corrections staff maintaining professionalism and neutrality. That word, neutrality, it is, being neutral. When dealing with the celebrity inmate, P Diddy's fame may make it difficult for some officers to avoid being starstruck or biased. And so strict boundaries must be enforced to prevent undue familiarity or favoritism. Hey, Joe, and I know how many times you get a famous inmate come in your facility and staff wants to go to the unit just to see that famous inmate.
Oh man, yeah, and I could tell you one example that comes to mind is BB King's son. We had him at our facility back in the 90s, And you know, everybody wanted to get to him to see to either get an autograph, and you know, it comes a point where you got to back them off. Hey guys, look, we're here to do a job. You know, we're not here to break bread with these guys. We're not here to, you know, gaggle over these guys because of their celebrity status. And the one thing the one thing I will mention is BB King's son was probably one of the most influential inmates I've ever met in my life. He came in, he was humbled about himself. He never used his dad as a crutch. And wound up being one of the most influential speakers that we've ever had as far as substance abuse. You know, and it got to a point where they were actually taking him from facility to facility to speak to other inmates going through the substance abuse process. So, you know, the staff needs to understand that, you know, regardless of their celebrity status, we have a job to do. They have a inmate number just like everybody else. You know, and we got to keep it professional. You can't let it get into your system. You can't let it overrule you. You can't let it make you biased to anything that he may or may not do while he's there. You know, he's an inmate just like everybody else.
Yeah, and guys, sometimes I get there's the initial impact, but usually from the routine, the frequency of the routine, they just start to blend in. Now, granted, the facility itself, the management side will always understand who that person is because there's a relevance to knowing that famous brand. And I have something we'll get to later about long-term, but so I won't go into it yet. We'll go into it later, but the frequency of the routine usually dulls the senses to it. Because eventually what's going to wind up happening is usually when it comes to celebrities, they kind of stay a distance, and that's where you become impressed. And that's because they're a distance, they're away, they're far over here. And, you know, I get it. But once you get them closer and you see the Mona Lisa and you see that they're going to be needy just like everybody else, you know, they're not perfect. You know, they're no longer a distance. They're right in front of you. That celebrity shit starts to wear down. You know, now they need you. You know, so, you know, you remember these celebrities, they're good for, you know, kind of admiring from a distance. But as you get closer to them, their flaws start to show. And eventually it's just the everyday Joe who happen to have success in something. I mean, you know, at one point they're defined by their success. Later on in the jail, they're defined by who they are. I think that makes sense. Whatever makes them successful is what brings the wanted attention. But then later on, that all fades to some extent, and now you're dealing with the individual, and that becomes the primary. I mean, think about people that marry famous people. I mean, they may be enamored the first couple of days, but after a while, it's just Johnny, not Johnny Depp. It's just John. Yeah. So it wears thin because the fame lessens and the person starts to surface. And it makes sense because the image you have created turns out to be not who you think they are, and the real person starts to supersede the image, the created image. I got one more part here, Joe, and it's we discussed this before, even with Wade Wilson, but just to go over it a little bit more. Routine and privileges, explore how P Diddy's daily routine would be managed, including access to privileges like recreational entertainment. Special considerations must be given to how his celebrity status could affect his interactions with both staff and inmates, ensuring that he's treated fairly without appearing to receive preferential treatment. So if I could start off, Joe, real quick. I mean, like any other inmate, they got to get their privileges. So they're not, even though they're in PC and isolated, they're not impunitive. So they have to get what's allotted to them. I mean, it could be more controlled. I think, to be honest with you, with the PC inmates, they should be allowed at one point contact visits because it's a non-punitive setting. You're just going to have to filter who visits them. And it may be very limited of who can be able to visit them. But technically, you can't deny them contact visits because they're in a PC setting. You can't deny them the privileges that the GP would get. They're just more controlled. They got to get rec like the regular GP population. They got to get whatever the GP population gets. They got to get access. Even if they're a non-congregate PC, you still got. That's why it costs so much. It costs so much because you're not doing them in the masses. You're doing them very controlled. But with that said, whatever the GP setting gets, they have to receive because it's not punitive to be. It's not supposed to be seen as being punitive when you're in some level of PC, whether it's congregate or non-congregate, and both, whether congregate or non-congregate, would allow for whatever the privileges are within that status, whatever their status would equate to. So if you got a inmate that would technically be max and GP, then they get what max inmates would be allowed to have. They're just not in GP in outside of the PC setting. Would you agree, John? There's not much difference there.
No, there's not much difference at all. There may be a redaction to the building schedule, where they can kind of twist where, if you do have a congregate PC pod, they can either get their visits first and get that out of the way, and then just let your general population have their visits afterwards. You're definitely not going to let the two mix. They'll have the same privileges. However, I'm pretty sure given what he's accused of, they're probably going to put sanctions on him as to who he can visit and who he can't visit. I'm sure he's probably going to be to, immediate family only. And I'm sure, maybe a son or a daughter, but he probably will not have any contact with anybody else's kids outside of his own flesh and blood, direct son and daughter. He may be restricted from seeing anybody under the age of 17 because of that. There may be some subtle differences for him in the way of sanctions because of what he's accused of. But, if he's in a congregate PC, they're basically getting the same access and same, programmatic and non-programmatic activities that everybody else gets. They just may get it at a different time than the general population.
Yeah, and guys, be honest with you, the more privileges to some extent, the easier it is for us to manage them, as long as they're not in excess and there's stuff that, as I said, we have control of. They don't, risk safety and security, but we have control of, if they mess up, we could take things away. But again, it's, there's not much difference there because then they could sue for, denying their rights, or denying, what the other inmates are allowed to have. And by the way, that does make sense. So if the other inmates are allowed to have it and they're not, they're going to say, well, I'm being punished because the other inmates can have it. And technically I'm not allowed to have it. This is a couple more areas. This is unique. This is more for the facility in general, but handling media attention and public relations. So what we have is hold on, there, you can get it. You want to get the VR, right? Yeah, I'm not going to edit that out. That's my daughter. You want to say hi real quick? Joe. Joe, this is Mia.
Hello.
Hi, Mia. How are you, sweetheart?
Good.
I live in the dungeon. You can take the VR. Go ahead. No, Sienna, bring the VR upstairs. You can play with your sister. I'm doing a show. All right, so I'm doing a show right now, Sienna. Please, I'm live. No, Sienna, I'm live. Please. Yeah, I'm live. You want to say hi too? You might as well. Come on, we're talking about P Diddy. Want to say hi real quick? Hurry up. Hold on, they both did. It's like a family reunion right now. Yeah, this is Sienna. Sienna, say hi.
Hi.
Sienna, how are you, sweetie?
You're good? Okay. So you're good. You said hi. You're unfamous now. Now go upstairs. Go take the iPad. Your sister's going to want to play with you. All right. So, So handling media attention and public relation. Now, Joe, this to me matters because this is what affects the facility as a whole. So when you have that celebrity come in, for a fact that facility is now under the spotlight. So that person that's coming in is bringing all that attention. I'm telling you something. It's going to start with P Diddy, and then it's going to eke into other policies and procedures. So what I have here, Joe, is managing public interest. P Diddy's incarceration would likely draw significant media attention. Discuss how the prison administration would handle this. Hold on. That one's got some heavy feet, man. Likely draw significant media attention. Discuss how the prison administration would handle this, from controlling the flow of information to managing outside visitors and media inquiries. Security concerns regarding high-profile visitors, such as family or friends from the entertainment industry, would also need to be addressed. This is where it also becomes a concern, too, because Joe may be familiar with this. Sometimes you get a lot of people that are calling in trying to claim that they're an emergency contact, and they may even know the name, just to get information about what's happening to him. And it could be the news media. So again, if you're in the facility, you got to make sure that phone number matches who that emergency contact is, because anybody could say the name, but the verification comes from that phone number. And if the phone number is not up to date, then you go back them to the inmate, send them over to social services. You better update your contact list, because these people that are calling for you, they're saying they're whoever it is, but their name is not matching what you have listed. So therefore, we're not giving them any information, because you are going to get those phone calls. They're going to come in, and a lot of these people from the media, they will say that they're a family member, or they'll say whatever they can in the hopes that you're going to give them information that they're not allowed to get. So people that work those phones inside those facilities, please don't just take the name. There's a number. Follow the phone number, because if they have that phone number, that's your number one ID. If that's the number on it and they're calling from that number, it is what it is. You verified the number. But if the name says Joe, but I'm calling from a different number, sorry, I don't know if you're Joe or not. But Joe, I mean, this is where, that's why we don't want the high profile inmates to some extent, because it puts the unwanted attention on the facility where you are really, and guys, not because you're doing anything wrong, because you're not, but you get scrutinized and judged. And that's the problem. You get people that are going to judge you for whatever has to be done without understanding why it has to be done.
Yeah, it does. It brings a lot of undue heat onto the facilities. Again, that's where your staff need to be very familiar with your policies and procedures regarding, media requests, individual requests. And I'm sure there's probably going to be a plethora of people calling, trying to gain information. You got the back alley newspapers. They're trying to be up and coming. They want to break a story first. We're not gonna divulge any information. Number one, that's gonna be detrimental to our security practices. We're not going to tell you if we moved him from one cell to the next cell, or from one area to another. We're not going to go that in depth. Media requests are just going to have to go through the same channels that they always do. They're going to have to go through, the public information officers. Some facilities may not have them. In Texas, we don't have PIOs at every facility. We have one main PIO at stationary in Huntsville, and all requests go through them as far as media. But yeah, you've got to be careful as to, who you talk to and what you divulge, because you got to make sure you got the actual person on, that phone. And, and even still, even if it's family, there's going to be very limited information that we're going to give. We may say that, yes, he's doing fine. He's fine physically. We're not having any issues. But we'll probably leave it at that. A lot of the times family members or friends or whatnot will try to call and try to get medical statuses and this, that, and the other, when is he going to court? We're not fixing to tell you all that, because it's a security issue. If the inmate finds out and he wants to write a letter and let them know when he's going to court, that's one thing. We can't stop it. But we got to make sure that we're not divulging privileged information to, somebody who may be, portraying themselves as a family member. We got to make sure that we're verifying everything before, and really it's not something that we're going to do at the frontline supervisory level. At least I'm not. I'm going to refer that up to my top brass administration and let them deal with that. Because I don't, that's something that we really don't need to deal with at our level. That should be taken care of, further up the chain. But, as far as information, it's not like we're going to divulge every action of this inmate of his daily life. We're not doing that. We're not going to divulge how he's housed, where he's housed, what his daily activities are. We're just not going to go into all that.
Yeah, and Joe, you made a very well. The whole thing was great, but I want to revisit something. So, guys, there's going to be a fascination with how life is going to be like for P Diddy in prison. Some people could be just fascinated because it's P Diddy, this famous guy that now is going to be under complete control. And then you have another aspect where people may just want to be. Sorry, I had to pause it for a second. So, Joe, just to reiterate, guys, just in case you know, I'm not going to go crazy editing. Just let me reiterate my thought. So there are going to be some people that have a fascination with P Diddy being in jail, kind of wondering how it shifts. What's his life going to be like from this to being controlled? And there's some people that could just be fascinated with the prison or jail life. So this gives them a chance to have insight into that world. And I like what Joe said, because there's going to be a call for transparency, but how do you balance that without violating the inmates' rights and violating safety and security? And it's a very controlled dance, because if you don't say a lot, people think you're hiding shit. It's true, and you're not. It's just they're not in the know. And I think if you say too much, there's so much you're going to jeopardize people that don't need to know, and the safety and security. So it's a fine balance, kind of like what we're doing right now. We're answering things in very generalized fashion to give people insight, but we're not telling you specifically what officer watches him. I mean, that's what they want to know. Who's the officers, and just whatever the specifics are that it's just not needed. You want an understanding of maybe what he's going through, but it's not like you're going to go ahead and take the keys and run the shift. We don't need to give you a play-by-play. We just need to give you a quick understanding of what his day is going to be like. So I think that's just an interesting thing. How do you balance transparency with the needs to protect the integrity of what the facility has to keep in, what they're not allowed to release? So the next thing I got, Joe, there's two last things. One thing I kind of skipped over because we kind of covered it real quick was we kind of talked about impact of P Diddy's fame on an inmate dynamic. So we did discuss, some inmates may idolize P Diddy, seeing him as a role model or trying to form alliances with him, while others could harbor a resentment or attempt to exploit his celebrity status. And this creates a challenging environment where correctional staff need to monitor interactions closely to prevent conflicts or incidents of manipulation. And we discussed that pretty much throughout what we were talking about, especially that congregate or non-congregate GP setting, PC setting. And then we got group dynamics and power shifts. P. Diddy's presence could also shift power dynamics among the inmates population, particularly if influential inmates try to leverage his fame for their own gain. And I think we kind of discussed that. I said when he first comes in, we got to see the influence, because at the end of the day, we have to be in a position to monitor what that influence could be. Because God forbid you put him out too early and he has influence like that, where if I don't have a taste of who this person is, how they're going to be in prison, I'm not ready to put them with other inmates just yet. Not someone like that, because I don't know if they do have influence, I'm not sure where that influence is going to go, so I like to kind of get an understanding of who this person is. Again, nothing's 100%, but I'm definitely not going to be doing it blindly, and to make a decision as to if this guy truly understands what we expect from him, and his level of responsibility or accountability if you don't follow these rules. And then that seems to work out and we get those expectations in play. Don't get me wrong. It's not 100% trust. But I say, well, you got to get him out eventually. So I think we had this discussion. It looks safe to let him out after being here for however long. So let's just give it a shot and see how these dynamics play out, because the biggest concern, again, is influence that changes that dynamic, which could pose a threat to custody, because if you got someone with great influence, they have the ability to unite the population. And now it's no longer an officer versus one inmate. It's an officer versus all of the inmates. And that's usually not the case. It's never one versus all. It's usually a few. So monitoring anything that can cause unity, especially someone that could have influence to unite, is a concern. So I got mental health and rehabilitation real quick. I wanted to put that in there. So the question is, explore the importance of mental health support for P. Diddy. High-profile inmates often struggle with isolation, anxiety, or depression due to the drastic lifestyle change. So we said the fall from grace. Regular check-ins with mental health professionals could be crucial in ensuring his well-being and preventing a mental health crisis. And then for rehabilitation programs, discuss whether and how P. Diddy could be integrated into educational vocational programs. While his fame and business success may make traditional rehabilitation efforts seem less relevant, providing structured activities and opportunities for growth can help keep him mentally engaged and focused during incarceration. So guys, when people are in those isolated PC settings, they don't have the ability to maybe go out as much as GP. So usually what's offered is going to come to them. Mental health is going to come every day on the working hours, the business days, rehabilitation. It's all going to be coming to their area because, again, they can't travel out. And also remember, they still committed crime. So rehabilitation does play a role, because again, they may be educated, may have all this stuff, but they also done wrong. So there's always going to be effort to get that person to think about what they've done and, more importantly, how it impacts others. But to be honest with you, I actually think when people are in these type of settings, Joe, when you tell me, a lot of people will partner isolation as if they're forgotten. But when it comes to the services that are provided, I think they get more effort than the general population does.
They do. It's not that we're demeaning them, but yeah, I mean, it's absolute fact, because we're making sure that they get what they're entitled to. We're also ensuring that they get what they need. Where, a general population status, we automatically assume and expect that they're already getting what they're supposed to get. Given where P Diddy is now, in his phase of all this, I would think mental health would probably be a bigger factor in his life right now than the rehabilitation side. The rehabilitation side will probably come later down the road, if and once he's convicted. I don't think the initial arrest and the initial incarceration is really looking at the rehabilitation side. I think it's going to be more the aspect of the mental health, depending on how much contact he's allowed to have with people, because you can't have contact with your, direct family because you're on some sort of investigative gag order. That plays on you. It's gonna wear you down at some point, especially if it goes for a lengthy process. So, do I see P Diddy working in a license plate factory, stamping plates and kicking it with his homeboys? I don't see that happening. However, I can pretty much guarantee that they are going to put a lot more effort into ensuring that he's getting what he's supposed to and what he's entitled to versus your normal general population inmate, at least for the initial phase. Once he becomes more settled in and, they make the determination whether or not to either release him to GP or put him in a congregate GP, I think that's when his dynamics will probably either shift or change. But I think right now the initial assessment is probably going to be the mental health side because, overnight he went from sleeping in his luxurious mansion, luxurious bed to, an 8x10 cell with a possible cellmate and, maybe on the top bunk. So there's going to be a drastic change for him. And I'm sure mental health is probably going to be seeing him pretty damn regular, just to keep tabs on his, mental acuity and make sure he's not deteriorating, from being isolated or being, kept away. I honestly think at some point, depending on the culture of the unit again and after the intelligence phase and the initial assessments, whether or not to release him to GP or put him in a congregate GP is probably going to be a factor. But I can guarantee you, as of right now, he's getting everything that he deserves and needs, and what he's entitled to as an inmate, with a lot more emphasis than what your normal off the street person that's serving federal time is getting.
Yeah, and guys, nothing's 100%, but remember, he turned himself in, so I don't think there's a reason to believe that he's looking to kill himself because he could have done that when he was on the streets. So I think he will go through some level of close watch, but I see him at the jail being cleared pretty quickly if he's even on it, because the fact that he did turn himself in, so this shows that he's trying to go through the process, trying to be correct. Maybe he has the hope that he's going to beat it all. I think the bigger concern will be after the case is done, depending on the outcome, if he is sentenced. Now you start to cross into that he may not be able to get. So you're going to see the hope starts to lessen, and that's when you really want to start working on that adjustment. In jails, I know it's tough for rehabilitation programs because inmates are there at inconsistent times. You don't know, they can go out at any moment or, but they do try to commit. Most of the time, if they can't do long programs, they may try to busy the person with activities. Let's just, do daily activities just to get the mind going. But for mental health is great because they can start something that can continue no matter where they go after that. First time you're being checked by mental health, if you go to a prison, everything gets transferred over to the prison. So you keep the person connected to what's being done. Sadly, unfortunately, when it comes to rehabilitation, if there's something that you were starting that in the jail may not always transfer outside, but definitely the the mental health, that usually takes higher priority, and it usually connects between the jail and the prison, or the jail and the outside, whatever the case may be. So if they do decide that maybe he is going through some depression, or maybe these crimes are related to a mental health concern, bipolar, whatever it is, they could begin treatment on that, and that will not, that will be pretty much continuous wherever he decides to go. So, and this is something obviously that's taken very seriously, because there's tremendous liability behind mental health. Obviously, if it's not addressed and there are concerns, and the person does do something foolish, people are going to manage the Monday morning quarterback the shit out of you. It's like, yo, you knew the circumstances. So even if the person says they were okay and they hang themselves, they're going to go back on the situation, not the person. And it's funny how things shift, because this is a business that's tough, because you make decisions on very limited information. But you got to make the decision.
Yeah.
And when you get Monday night quarterbacked, and maybe this is advice for whoever is on the managing, whatever, however you got to justify this, but you got to make sure that, especially when it comes to circumstances. Let's say if I did have an inmate that winds up taking their own life, if the person cried for help and you ignored it, and maybe you said, well, you know what, the person brought himself in, I thought they were playing a game, you push the situation, they'll push the disposition or the person. And then maybe there's a time where the person doesn't say they're going to hurt themselves. You think it's okay to let them go, and you push for disposition, or you push for the person, and they push against the situation. Well, you knew the context. You knew that they were in here and he's crashing down. So it's like when you make a decision, you got to take into account both. I think you got to take into account how the situation affects the person, but also know enough about the person to know how they're affected by the situation. So you're not going to know that right when the person comes in. That's something that has to be developed and takes time, because you got to see how they both interact, and does this person have some level of resilience to what they're facing, or are they completely vulnerable and giving you a front? So it's a very fine dance, but a decision has to be made. And regardless of the outcome, because you're not in control of the outcome. I want everybody to know that the person in control of the outcome is the person that you're watching. That's the only person that's in control of the outcome. All we can do is try to prevent. But trust me, if someone wants to hurt themselves, they know when and how to do it. Because we can't be on them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 50 years.
Yeah.
There's going to be an in and out process all the time. And sometimes we're preventing, sometimes we're reacting, so we can prevent. But it's just a dance sometimes. And it's just hoping it doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, when you make that decision, you have to make sure that when you go to justify that decision, you find a way to balance the pressures of the situation, but the person's vulnerabilities in regards to how they may react to the pressures, and be able to justify from both, so you can prepare for any argument that decides to isolate each one, because that's what they do. They will literally decide to separate the person from the situation, or the situation from the person. So if you decide to say this person didn't show any signs, well, what about the situation? Or, well, there was nothing really pressuring him, but what about what he said? So you got to make sure that when you go to justify it takes both into account, situational concerns as well as the person's I want to say disposition. I think that's the right word. But Joe, does that make sense before we move on to the last category?
It does. When it comes to mental health, making decisions regarding mental health, it's really it's a double-edged sword, because even with clear policy and directives as to what to do if you see indicators or don't see indicators, it's really a double-edged sword. Somebody can come in and give you all the right answers and not display any suicidal ideations whatsoever. And the following day, they hang themselves, or they actually commit suicide, and even though they showed no signs, they're going to come to you and say, well, he hung himself. He committed suicide in his cell. Why didn't you knew the situation he was in, and there's been there's times where, you go as far as getting them seen by a mental health physician who also clears them, but yet they still go on and commit suicide with no kind of, even if they give you the right answer, it's really a double-edged sword, and then there's times where they successfully commit suicide, never showed one iota of having any kind of suicidal ideations, but they did anyway, then, they're like, well, shit, Gangi was in this high profile case. Why didn't you do something about it? What the fuck you want me to do? He showed no signs. He was cleared by mental health, but he still took his life anyway. I followed the policies and directives. He didn't give me any indication that he was going to do it. He never showed any signs or symptoms, never made any outcries. He acted normally. He was cleared by mental health. I mean, what do you want me to do? I can't keep him in a blue suit for 2 weeks just because. If he's mentally acuitive and he's not showing any, suicidal ideations, the first 48 hours maybe we'll keep him in a blue suit. But we're not gonna do it on a constant basis just because of his situation. Regardless of whether they want to or not want to, if they are really inclined to do it, they're going to do it when nobody knows about it.
Yeah, and
it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Even if you have clear policies and directives in place to help you ward against it, you're still going to have that handful of times where you have successful suicides, even though you followed all your policies, you followed all your mental health training, and you followed the mental health physician's directives and his opinions. I mean, if he comes back and tells you, I don't feel that he's a risk for being harmful to himself or anybody else. I mean, it's just one of those double-edged swords. When it does happen, and if it does happen, it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, and Joe, I just got, because you're spot on. I want people to understand this. So this is what happens when you have to manage these inmates that are high profile, where it would be easier to keep them on consequence, but you can't. It's just not realistic. And the funny thing is, when we make decisions, we may judge our decision based on an outcome with knowledge that the outcome happened, the hindsight bias. But sometimes we're making a decision. We don't know that. We know it's a potential. But having said that, sometimes we get so concerned with the outcome that was truly out of our control. It truly was. I mean, this person did what they had to do to get to where they had to be, that we judge our decision poorly. We judge the decision we made based as if we really had all this information. And the funny thing is, that's how the public looks at it too. But that's why you always have to remember, defend your position from what you knew at that time and not from what was discovered later. It's unfair to yourself, and for the public that pushes people, it's unfair because we're human. And there's so many things that go into our weight of a decision. And really, to be honest with you, people may not realize this, but in the prison setting, the weight is to get the guy out of those stabilization units, because you don't want to keep people there long term, because maybe briefly for a few hours, it can help manage impulse. But if they're there too long, they can decompensate.
Absolutely.
So there's this fucking balance that's got to be kept. And at one point, someone has to manage the risk and say, you know what? I got to get him out. Because that now the point is, the greater concern doesn't become he's going to hurt himself. The greater concern is now he's going to decompensate.
Yeah.
So, and that can happen. Even we didn't cross out. I mean, that can happen with this case. So you make those decisions, you stick with the decisions, and you just know how to defend them. And yes, it sucked that the outcome occurred. I'm not minimizing that. We don't want that to happen. But if you've done everything you should do or could have done when the decision was made based on the information you had, at one point you stand by your decision, instead of getting caught up with the thing that you couldn't control from begin with. Hey, I made the decision at this point based on this information. I'm sorry that this happened, but your knowledge of what happened after the fact does not affect what I could have done in the moment. And the last one I got, Joe, is the long-term implications for both facility and P Diddy. So what I have here is the institutional impact. The housing of a celebrity inmate like P Diddy can have long-term implications for the facility. We kind of talked about that with the increased media scrutiny, the potential changes in how high-profile inmates are managed. Kind of discussed that. And then I have post-incarceration life for P. Diddy, discussed the potential impact of incarceration on P. Diddy public image and career. While prison could tarnish his reputation, it could also offer a path to redemption if he navigates the experience wisely. So explore how his time in prison might influence his life after release. I mean, depends on how long-term they're there, but I mean, no matter how long-term an inmate's there, we always try to give them the programs to look as if they're going to get released because you can't deny them. But to be honest with you, it's funny. If I can answer this question, everything that asked, I'll make it real quick, Joe. That's not up to us.
No.
That's up to them. And I want to mention one thing, Joe. I was reading a book, the Zebra, is it the Zebra Effect? The Lucifer Effect. It's the old the Stanford prison experiment, Philip Zimbardo. And one of the things he said at the beginning was, it's always easier to believe that a good person could do bad things because it's more situationally driven than it is for a bad person to become good. And we mean belief. So when someone asks me, let's say for the P. Diddy situation, when someone asks me, do you believe people can change? I want to just explain this once and for all. And this is how I've been able to balance, even being in prison management and having to manage rehabilitation, having to manage safety and security, and trying to find balance where we don't conflict. Because I don't believe we conflict. I think it's a working partnership. But with that said, when someone asks me, do I believe people can change? And sometimes we do have people that stand on the extremes. You have people from custody, nope. That's why they're here. And people from rehabilitation that this is what they do. They believe in it, and that's why they're in the career. They believe even in the worst case scenarios, people have the ability to change. I think the safest answer for that for me, and I think this may reflect the P. Diddy situation, is if I look at someone and I see what they've done, whether situationally driven or just, maybe let's say who they are. If it's a situation, I get it. Sometimes a situation gets the best of us. I think that maybe the person could have made a bad choice. That doesn't mean that they were a bad person. They just, situation got the best of them. So maybe it's not about the person changing at that point. It's about that person admitting that they messed up and, taking onus of that responsibility, because maybe they were a good person, but the situation, they had one bad moment. So that doesn't mean that the person could be a bad person. It just means that they had one bad moment. So I expect accountability. So we could just acknowledge it, and maybe there's no need to change. Maybe there's just something there that you just acted wrongly. You step up, you admit it, and hopefully we're able to move forward, however drastic, again, in this scenario. But the dispositional ones, if I got a person who, it's not a one-time thing, but rather this is who they've been for years, and this is just a pattern of life that they've had. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying people can't change. Of course, there are some people that realize the error of their ways. But when you got somebody like this who has been doing this for so long, for so many years, it's hard for me to see the good in someone like that, because this has been their lifestyle. Now, granted, I didn't say I don't believe people can change. I'm very safe with my words, but it's harder for me to see it because they have lived a life that has been defined by this, literally. So it's hard for me to see this person as anything else. What's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, and a lot of it's got to do with the situation that they're in too. You're talking a night and day difference between, let's say, Justin Timberlake, who was just on the news behind his DWI, and now we got P Diddy. We're talking about somebody who made a one or two time mistake versus somebody who's been doing it over the course of years. There may be some long-term implications on the facility. But given the fact that, things tend to die down after a while, and somebody else may pop into the media spotlight later on down the road, and P Diddy may just be, just another forgotten inmate in a facility, because now they got another celebrity to tune in on. you also gotta take into consideration too that how long he's going to be there. There's probably amongst the population, and even notoriety will sometimes play itself out in the general population. It's not about, oh shit, it's P Diddy. It's just, oh, it's just P Diddy. Um, a lot of it dies out over time, depending on who the person is, what they've done. If they get convicted, there's a lot of factors that play into it. But you're talking about, like I said, you're talking about somebody who is being accused of doing this for quite some time. Will there be implications to the facility? I don't think there will be implications to the facility itself. I think the implications will be more about him as his case progresses. And days like today, he went back for a bond reduction hearing, an appeal, and he pretty much got knocked in his head. The judge said, no, you're going to be held in custody until your trial. So it's just one of those things where once you're in that position, you're going to have to take your lumps and bumps, and at some point, you're going to have to understand that you're just a commoner now. You're in and amongst commoners, and your celebrity status is not going to absolve you of what you've done in the past. It's not going to absolve you in your future if you're convicted. There's just a lot of there's a big difference in how that plays out. Like I said, the Justin Timberlake thing with his DWI. He got up there in the press and pretty much admitted he was a dumbass. He did it, he apologized because he made him look bad to his fans, made his family.
Yeah, but Joe, he didn't take full accountability, because he also said when he did that, that's what happens when you only have one drink.
Yeah.
I don't think there was I think he was also trying to minimize it by saying he only had one drink.
Yeah, and that's true too. But the crime itself has a lot to do with I'm sorry I got caught because this is my second DWI versus I'm sorry I got caught because I trafficked 3,000 kids. Huge difference.
And I want to mention something, guys. When it comes to long term, I think when you're famous because of your crime, so that means the crime is the main centerpiece. That actually tends to die out a bit quicker unless there's anniversaries or court cases get reheard or whatnot. Fame, that means you're coming in famous, tends to last a lot longer. I mean, literally a lot longer, because when you're becoming famous, there's just so many different legacies that you're that's being left behind. I think it dies out a little bit generation to generation, but usually when you're famous and everybody knows who you are, like a P Diddy, you're always going to have that interest, at least I would say for the next 50 years, minimal, because it's just, you're famous, and there's going to be that interest, so eventually, people, may, as the newer generation gets older, they don't know your music. You've been locked up for so long, people may start to forget about you. But that's not going to happen as quick as it would be if you're famous for your crime. I think when you're famous because you're like P Diddy, you've done all this music and all this other stuff, and you're leaving so much behind. Right now, this is also being introduced to, let's say, even the newer generation when they're watching this, trying to figure out who this guy is. Being famous coming in tends to last a lot longer than you just being famous for your crime. I think so.
I personally think it's probably going to die out. I don't think it's going to last as long as they think it is, because you look at actors like Robert Downey Jr., Wesley Snipes. These were both celebrity, high profile people, and once they went into custody, you really didn't hear much about it. Wesley Snipes with his tax evasion, you didn't hear. He did his time and came out, and
but
you really knew.
The reason why I think that's the case, though, Joe, is like you mentioned. I think there was always an interest, because as soon as they came out, everybody was all over them. It's because the facility protected it. So once you start hitting that dead wall and you're not getting the information you want, you got to move on to another story. But the moment they came out, where was the media?
Yeah.
all over them. So I get what you're saying 100%, but I think that sometimes if it does die out, it may only die out because the media can't get the information they want to keep it alive. But it could go the other way too. I mean, it depends on the celebrity. But as I said, when those guys got released, even when Bill Cosby, when they all get released, the media swarms. They swarm because maybe they don't know. Let's see what it's like. We haven't found out about this guy for years, and so I still think there's still a want, but the media may not have access to keep fueling it. So, but eventually, when the person comes out, so that's bravo to the facilities that know how to cut that off. Yeah, we're not here for people's amusement.
Yeah.
So, hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing? This was a good dialogue, man. A little unique.
Yeah, it's pretty unique. Hopefully, they'll kind of give you a better aspect as to what their daily life may be for P Diddy. Hopefully it gives you a better aspect of from the prison management side as to what we see. We don't necessarily listen to media outlets and prior to them getting there, but we have a job to do. We try to treat them fairly. We try to treat them with respect. We try to treat them with firmness, fairness, and consistency. We don't really, from our end, that status really doesn't mean much to us, but we do take things into consideration once they step onto our facility. There are things that we look at. There are things that we have to take into consideration. So, because of the celebrity status, there's probably a few extra steps that we go through versus the normal inmate, but hopefully it gives y'all a better vision, from the prison management standpoint as to what we look at, when a celebrity hits our facility.
Yeah. And guys, I may be able to speak from the inmate perspective, but managing prisons for so long, I mean, they're either going to welcome them in or they're not. But with that said, it's a very tough thing to control. There's a balance, and we mentioned a few of them. So hopefully it's able to give you a little bit of insight of what it's like to manage a celebrity. I don't think much will change. The celebrity may change, but the management, may not change as much unless it depends on what they've done. Because I think with P Diddy, you also could have incidents with minors that now puts a whole nother light on things. But with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe and interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.